Hey everybody, welcome back to What Self Care Looks Like. You are on with Brittany Elliott. I am self care and mom life management coach, and I help working moms create simple and sustainable self care routines that impact their overall wellness and enrich their lives. And we are in the Mother's Day series, which, if you've been listening to my podcast for a while, you know that I do this once a year, and I just love bringing you the stories of other mothers. And so today we have Dr. Caitlin Hostetler as our guest. And if you've listened to her bio, she has a whole lot going on. It took me 3 minutes to get through, which I love. And the amazing thing about it is I know her simply as Kate. So, Dr. Caitlin Hostetler is a seasoned professional with extensive experience in psychology, counseling, and mental health advocacy, holding a doctorate in psychology with a specialization in counseling psychology and a Master of Science in professional counseling with a focus on drug and alcohol specialization. Dr. Hostetler is equipped with a robust academic background. Throughout her career, Kate has demonstrated a deep commitment to serving individuals in need of mental health support. As the clinical director and co-owner of Mint Therapy LLC, a private practice in Pittsburgh, PA, she has led her team in providing tailored therapy services to clients, overseeing all aspects of clinical operations, and offering guidance to fellow clinicians. Prior to starting her own practice, Dr. Hostetler spent years working inside prisons, state hospitals, and other institutions providing mental health care to vulnerable populations. Her dedication extends beyond private practice settings. She has been actively involved in community initiatives, such as her role with Reimagine Reentry in Pittsburgh, where she played a key role in developing and implementing mental health programs to support individuals transitioning back into society from local, state, and federal prisons. Notably, she has also made significant contributions to academia, serving as an adjunct professor at both Robert Morris University and Carlow University. Through her teaching experiences, she has imparted knowledge on topics such as multicultural counseling, qualitative research, and substance abuse counseling, while fostering a supportive and inclusive learning environment for her students. In addition to her clinical and academic endeavors, Dr. Hostetler is dedicated to continuous professional development and pouring into the field of psychology. She has conducted professional presentations on subjects ranging from the psychology of addiction to therapeutic communities and has led training sessions to enhance the knowledge and skills on topics such as personality disorders, trauma-informed care, and professional boundaries. Dr. Caitlin Hostetler's multifaceted career journey reflects her unwavering commitment to promoting mental well-being, advocating for social justice, and empowering individuals to lead fulfilling lives. Before the career and pouring into her clients, students, and colleagues, Dr. Hostetler is a loving partner and a mother to her 2 kids and bonus son. She has the all too common challenge of balancing a passion and career and being an attentive, loving mom, partner, friend, sister, and daughter. This balance looks like scheduling appointments around kid activities and always having time to read a book or a quick park trip. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me on. I'm super excited.
Thanks so much for being here. And I just want to jump right into it because you have so much happening in your life, overall with all the work that you do, along with, being a mom and having really big goals for your growth as you continue on this joyous ride of life. So tell us all a little bit more about your journey into motherhood.
Yeah, so I became, I guess, an official mom about almost 6 years ago. It's coming up fast. And my journey into motherhood feels it feels organic to me, but I'm recognizing on paper and kind of as I was preparing to come on here, I kind of became a mother out of nowhere in the middle of building a career. So I was at the tail end of my doctoral uh, studies, I guess, and getting ready to go on internship, which is something that you have to do in the field of psychology when you get a doctorate. You have to apply to this lottery and kind of go through all of these extra things. And a couple, I would say like maybe a month before I was preparing for that process, I'm like, oh, I'm pregnant and I'm gonna, be a mom. I'm going to go through with this pregnancy. Like, I'm gonna be a mom. And being excited about that, and then also just realizing that, like, oh, this might not be the time and place to do, like, I have so much going on, and other people's reaction, which was like, oh, like, well, are you gonna like stop your career? Are you gonna stop going to school? Like, what? How does this work? And in my mind, I'm like, of course not. I'm just gonna balance everything because that's what you do is you just prioritize when you can and how you can. So becoming a mom happened like, almost 6 years ago. And um, I don't know, since then, it has been a lot of pivoting and a lot of like, oh, okay, here's the next thing I have to do. And like, this is the next chapter. And oh, well, that was a tragedy I wasn't prepared for, a challenge I wasn't prepared for. And like, just coming to the table every day and being like, what do I have to deal with today? And like, what will this look like?
How much do you feel like your life changed from that point? Because you were so not just committed, but you were just doing it. Like you were just so invested, I should say, in your career, in the growth there. And I think that what happens sometimes is it's like you're carrying a child, but we really don't know how it's going to be a mom really until you get into it. So when you're at that time, like your child is born and you're like momming,
Mhm.
how did that really impact your investment in your career and really how you had to manage it at that point?
So that actually, there was some really big considerations that happened before he even got here. And part of that is because internship can take you all over the place. And I, at that time, had spent so much time developing and like working towards working in the prison system, and more specifically, the federal prison system. I knew that, like, okay, this is kind of the path that my career is going to go. And what ended up happening is as soon as I had to go, oh, I need to kind of prioritize this human that's going to come into the world, and moving across the United States from my partner and my family with a newborn, like what does that look like in real life? And also, okay, I'm not gonna do that, right? Like I like literally cannot do that. So what will this look like? Because it's not like you make a ton of money. You have to figure out housing, childcare. How are you going to feed yourself and the baby, and how are you going to balance all of a sick day, staying up all night? That just, my plans had to pivot because of being a mom. And so it went from, oh, I'm going to go to interview only at federal prisons. I'm going to get a position within a federal prison, and then that's going to be my career. And having that like picture of what my life was going to look like, being like, oh, in 2 months you have to pivot, you have to come up with a new plan, you have to be open to new ideas. And so I think that's not only something that I think most moms experience, is like, what's my life going to look like? And then becoming pregnant or becoming a mom and being like, oh, I have to make different decisions out of this, or I have to go different paths. For me, that felt a lot like grief too, because it's like I had this idea of what I wanted my life to look like. And although I'm very excited about becoming a mom, this is where it started to clash between like, oh, this isn't about me. And although me is very much in this path of like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this career, and I'm going to be good at this because I've invested so much time and energy into being even this particular style of therapist. In like 2, 3 months, I had to change all of that. And I had to be a lot more open, and I had to consider myself in other spaces that I had once been like, oh, those are fine spaces, but maybe that's not for me. So I had to pivot really significantly, even into where I was going to go on internship.
Mhm. And so how does that, cuz we know just from your bio that you have 3 children, right? 2 plus a bonus child,
Mhm.
which is already like, as a step parent, it's different from like when you have your your kids, I would imagine there's just like a little bit of difference there. But how overall did where you took your internship, what you had to do to focus on your career, like how did that impact your motherhood style or like your approach to motherhood overall?
I would say that this has given me endless opportunities to have more grace as a mom, right? So not only for myself as a mom, being like, "Oh, you had a hard day. It is okay to have hard days. Hard days are part of the job. It's in the job description, right?" But it's interesting. I think that I've grown into who I am as a mom today by working in tough environments and also seeing the product of childhoods that were not poured into. Like
Mm,
when we really start looking at our institutions in general. So I'm not even talking about like schools have their own thing that we need to look at in a bigger picture. But I think when we start talking about prisons and state hospitals, you're looking at individuals whose childhoods may have absolutely directly impacted where they are today, either through neglect or not having their needs met or emotional, trauma, physical, sexual trauma. And actually, I would say working in the state hospital system, one of the things that probably changed my outlook on life a lot was I went and did in their system, there is a building that is dedicated only to sex offenders. And I worked in that building for quite some time and even longer than my internship. So I had stayed on board. I had finished my internship, finished my degree, became a doctor, and then I stayed on board. And working in that facility was really challenging for a couple different reasons. One, all of those individuals had been there because they had committed sexual offenses and were deemed too dangerous by the state to go out into society. And so there was this real reality that they were children when they had committed their crimes, so to speak, right? And they're adults now, and we are still trying to like rehabilitate them and really impact their mental health, or I guess improve their mental health. And that building was challenging not only as like a parent but also as a human, because you're talking about like this is a population that it's not like when I went out and talked to other therapists who didn't work in the healthcare system, or I'm sorry, like in the state hospital system, they were like, "Oh yeah, I'm really understanding to this." It's like, why would you do this work? Like, why are you there? Why are like I thought drug dealers were your thing. Like, how did you end up here? Like, what was this? And then on top of it, you also had to be very aware of like their crimes and the victims in their cases. Like I'm raising people that were in that demographic, right? So there's this real tear between hearing these horrific stories and really experiencing what I guess we could like workplace vicarious trauma of listening to this stuff, and then also going home and trying to be like, oh, I got to protect this person, and I also have to be within reason. Like I can't keep him from the world, right? Or I couldn't protect him to no end. And so I think that was a really challenging, just like workplace level of awareness of like, oh, bad stuff happens, but that doesn't mean that bad stuff is going to happen to my kid. Like I can be reasonable with this response.
yeah, that's such a good point because I was thinking about in the work that you do. I, for me, think that it's very scary to be a parent. I think there's a very much
Yeah.
an element of fear in like when my child is with me, I feel more of a security in that. And then when they go out into the world, like I don't know what's going to happen to them. And you start to think the worst, right? But I think in our minds, we could almost always come up with something that's even worse than the worst case scenario. But
Mhm.
you work with the worst case scenario, which means it's real. Like it is
Mhm.
very tangible to you what the outcome could be, which I would think could make it like very like terrifying to be a parent, but I feel like you carry it very well that it doesn't come out in your parenting style where you're like a helicopter mom as you
Yeah.
could be. Like you still give your kids rope. So I want to know just like overall as far as your motherhood journey, like what kind of challenges have you had to overcome, whether it's managing your life professionally or just the momness of it? What have been your challenges?
So That's such an interesting question because I feel like I could list endless challenges. I'm like, I dealt with this today and this yesterday. So working in an environment where we see kind of the horrors of being alive in some ways, right? And like we are bearing witness to someone's trauma. And this is not something that is totally outside the bounds of any therapist or anybody that works in the human field, because you are exposed to humanity and then you are left to do, like, what are you going to do with that, and how can you learn from that? So on a very practical level, there's things that I struggle with as a parent, like sleepovers, right? I struggle really heavy with that idea. And I know, I mean, there's probably going to be people that listen to this and be like, why sleepovers? And it's like, because stranger danger isn't like, yes, that's a real thing, but it's usually like when we talk about things that will make me nervous about, it's like that off-putting friend, or like that person that's just like a little too friendly with kids, or a little like just like the vibes are off a little bit, right? Because we know that it's actually usually like a crime of opportunity, and especially when it comes with other kids. So I struggle with sleepovers, and not because I don't trust people. It's that idea of, oh, if they're home with me, I can protect everybody they're around, right? Or I can manage everyone they're around. So like on a practical level, that's just like one way that my career has ruined me as a parent in a lot of ways, because I'm like, oh no, we can't, you can't go, there's strangers that live there. I'm like, yeah, you can't do that. But I actually think this is something that I struggle with a fair amount, or like a challenge is the balance between recognizing that these are your children and you gave birth to them and they're a big part of your life, right? Because you agreed to pull people from non-existence into existence, and like you made that decision, right? I struggle with this idea of, I'm responsible for this decision, and I also want them to be free, like free spirits, and like have their own kind of autonomy to make decisions. And I think that in our world, that's not always supported. So sometimes as a parent, I will feel like, man, should I be tougher on my kids, or should I have more restrictions on them, or should I do this? Because I get pushback from other people at times of like, oh, you're making them too soft, or, there's, why do you let him pick what he wants for dinner? And it's like, it's not so much like about the meal, it's about him being able to make decisions as a human about what he wants to do within reason, right? So, like, of course, you're not going to have Skittles for dinner, right? Like, be for real. But if you don't want these noodles, can we pivot to something else? Like, yeah, within reason.
Yeah. And that, man, I struggle with that too. Not even a struggle as much. It's just coming to terms with people are going to judge me probably regardless of what I do, but you still have that internal battle of, am I doing it the right way or am I not doing the right way? But I think that, as you know, in the work that you do, sometimes you just have to do it the best that you can in
Mhm.
that moment. Like you have to try it out and give it the opportunity to work. And if it doesn't work, then of course, give yourself permission to pivot with something else. Do you feel like it's like it really is judgment? Like, are people coming to you and it's just like, for a fact that they disagree with what's going on and you still have to be kind to those people? Because I struggle with that.
I struggle with that hot and heavy, right? Because it's like I I don't want to be like, oh, I know the research behind this, so I want to raise my kids with love, right? Like I know the research behind this, because that's like not an actual dialogue with someone. And it's trying to maybe have people understand a philosophy behind parenting. Like, you have to see the bigger picture, and there are hills that I won't die on as a parent. And I think like that comes down to recognizing, so this is like a bigger thing. One of the things I think is the most challenging as a human is being dehumanized by other people. And we do this a lot, and it's a comfort that we actually like, we choose comfort over recognizing someone else's perspective in a lot of ways. And it's easy to dehumanize people. And I think children are the easiest ones to do this to, because we can be like, oh, well, their feelings don't matter, or I'm the boss in this situation, or what I say goes. And to challenge that on a very like everyday level with my kids, I'm going to let them be the humans that they are. And, in like a funny kind of way, this actually came up not that long ago, and so I can have like a perfect example for this. Do you remember the school sent out the science fair stuff about like the
Mhm.
kids can pretend? I being like into education, all this stuff, I'm like, oh, we're doing this without a doubt. I got so hyped up. I'm like thinking about all the like projects that we could do and how big it could get. I was hyped, right? So I go and talk to my son, and he looks at me and he's like, "Yeah, that's not really my thing." And I'm like, What do you mean it's not your thing?" And I'm trying to explain it to him because I'm like, "Oh, maybe he doesn't understand how exciting a science fair could be. Like, let's amp up here." And he's like, I just don't know if I want to present something, and like, I just don't know if I want to do this." And in that moment, I had this realization that my needs were, we're going to do the science fair and we're going to have a ton of fun with this because, we're not, it's going to be different than a volcano. Maybe we'll do the parts of the brain that come in. And he's just like, hey, that's not something because it's, it was an elective. So it's like not something that he wanted to spend his time doing or really wanted to connect to. And in that moment, I had to give him the space to be like, oh, if we do this, we're doing it for me. We're not doing it for him. And that challenge of knowing that there's benefits to it, like, of course, he could get a lot from doing the science fair, but am I forcing him to do it because I had an interest in it? And that was like a chance for me to be like, project. I'm like, we were bust
Mhm.
out construction paper and markers, like, it's going to be beautiful. But I had to meet him where he was. And why maybe push him to do something that I felt more convicted about or have more convictions for. So that challenge comes up a lot because in that moment I could have just like, oh, your feelings don't matter and you're absolutely doing this and you're going to like it. But in reality, I that's just minimizing his experience and forcing him and telling him how he's going to feel about something and forcing him to do something. And now there are situations where that has to happen. Like eye drops when you get pink eye. I know you don't want them in your eyes, but guess who's getting like a little bit of strong love that has to come into that. But it has to be varying hills to die on. And I think that sometimes being able to see your kids as humans no matter what age they are, right? And in that moment, asking yourself, like, well, what's really important here? And for the science fair, it was like, oh, I want my needs met, and we're going to do this really cool project together, and it's going to be amazing. And in reality, that's not what was important. The like for him, he was like, yeah, I'd like to spend time with you, but can we not do this, right? Like, can we do something different? Um, and it's being able to be like, oh, like they're humans. And I don't know if I'm going to talk about older generations specifically. I don't know if that is necessarily a parenting style or a parenting option that older generations were cultured to do, which is to recognize that like, oh, these are actual humans who have real feelings and real wants and real needs. And how does that look like prioritizing that or centering them a little bit in the conversations?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do want to take a step back just for our listeners. Because so Kate and I met organically. We are friends as of this school year because
Yes.
our kids are both in the same classroom and they met. And then I saw Kate at like open house or some other things. And then I didn't really stalk them, but I happened to see them going into their house, which is in our neighborhood. So then we became friends at a very organic level. So when talking about things that we talked about before, it's like we are literally getting the same emails from the school. And in that situation for the science fair, I completely understand that challenge because I did the opposite. I got it and immediately was like, immediately no. Like, we're not doing that. Like, I don't have the capacity to help you build a science project for fun. Like, it's not even a requirement. And so I was like, immediately no. And then I had to backtrack and say, okay, do you want to do the science fair? Like, I had to ask my daughter, are you interested in doing that? And she, luckily for me, was also no. And so I
Yeah.
didn't have to do that. But I think that challenge is real when you're saying, like, am I doing this because of my feelings, whether it's a yay or a nay? Like, am I doing this because of me, or am I really listening to what my child wants? And I think when it comes to judgment, like for our listeners, I think that Kate, you are in a very like different situation where you actually have the education, the tools, the research, the stats, and all of the justifications to really tell somebody who's judging you, like, I do it this way because studies show that X, Y, and Z. And you can
Hmm.
kind of throw that doctor at someone. Because even when I was reading your bio, I was like, oh, I forgot how legit she is. It's Dr. Kate around here. Do you know what I mean? But like for
Hmm.
me, all I can do is say like not all I can do, but I feel almost powerless to just be like, well, this is what I'm doing, so shove off. So do you have any advice like for our listeners when they're up against that, judgment, especially because the people who judge us are typically parents, siblings, people who are close to us, people that we love. Like, do you have almost like a stand your ground way of communicating, like, this is my style and this is what I'm trying, please respect that?
So I think that's actually a really great question because it's like, how do you practically go about these conversations? Because they get heated pretty quickly. Um, my approach really looks a lot like bring like why are we at a difference here? So I never try to talk about this in front of my children either because I want them to understand that there are differing opinions, but we need to make sure that they're coming from actual places of knowledge versus places of feelings, because I think that matters. So in the context of, I guess the easiest way to say this is centering the kid, right? So when I talk about my son and the way that I give him a little bit more freedom to make decisions, or how even my parenting philosophy, I could go back and say, like, oh, these are the books that I read, and like this is the literature that's out there and all the research. But I like to go back and go, like, for him, what's really important is this, and this is why his feelings are hurt, or like this is why we give a little bit more space. So, I think even outside of the science fair, one of the things that we deny little boys often are emotions, right? A wide range of emotions. And so for me, I have always tried to be like, hey, you're sad. It's okay to be sad. Like, and here's how to go. And so from that, though, I've allowed him to cry as a person, and as a parent. And I think, also his dad has allowed him to cry. So, I mean, this is a team effort on this, absolutely. But older generations sometimes have a reaction to little boys who express emotion. And I think that is a hill that I've absolutely talked about where it's like he's allowed to experience. And they're like, no, he's whining. Like he's just being like a little baby about stuff. And I go, yeah, okay, take a step back. Why would a 5-year-old be whining about something? Like, why would a 5-year-old be upset about something? It's not going to have the same logic and reason that we would be upset about something. So think about when you have a bad day. So a bad day for me could be, um, like spilling coffee, right? I'm like, no, what is this, right? And you'll have a whole range of emotion about it. Like, is life worth living now that this cup has spilt? Like, right? So that was probably really loud, sorry. But the the reality of it is sometimes we put adults like thoughts and emotions and logic on kids and it's not that deep. So if he's upset because he has to go take a shower. Yeah, that might be like he didn't want to do that right now. And it's the same as like when your boss walks in and goes, hey, you need to answer this email. And then after you're done with that, make sure you make these phone calls. And like you feel micromanaged and you feel like, oh, I don't want to do that. Like I was scrolling on Instagram. Like, like I'll get to that when I can. I think sometimes we like don't give that to kids. And so that conversation typically looks like he's 5. What do you want from him? Like how big how how much space are you willing to give a 5-year-old? How much space are you willing to give a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 20-year-old, right? And I think that's really dependent on one, how much space you were given as a kid. And sometimes we go, well, I was a kid, I sat and I was quiet all the time. Like, was that healthy for you? Like, did you learn to express yourself? Did you learn how to have conversations or how to have opinions or even thoughts on things? Um, so it looks a lot like what do you think would be an appropriate reaction to that? And really digging in there, opposed to maybe coming at odds with someone, if that makes sense. Like I try to do it, I try to be as like helpful as possible, or giving the adult as much space as possible to at least talk about whatever it was that upset them.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's actually very helpful to really look at it as a conversation. Like, let's talk
Mhm.
about this. We don't have to really be on opposing sides. We don't really have to try to win because at the end of the day, when that person leaves your house, you're going to parent the way that you are planning to parent anyway. But like
Absolutely.
you said, to just give that other person space to express, why they feel that you should have handled something differently. And I think that when you like when it's the people closest to you, I think you have to give them the benefit of the doubt that they aren't doing it in a malicious way. It come off that way, but that's really not their intent. So thank you for sharing that because I
Mhm,
think that your expertise in like just people, like, and how we
mhm.
evolve is very important, to our listeners and understanding, like, you actually don't go that down that route with people. You don't lead with, "I am a doctor." And, like, "I can't," like, "I know why this is right." You actually give everybody space, and I think that's very special. Like, I've never been in the same room as you and felt like less than, and like some people with their titles and with everything they know will make you feel like that. And I love that you don't do that. You don't do that to me. You don't do that to your children. Like I've never seen you do that to anybody. Like you just hold space for everybody to be who they are. And I think that's very valuable.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Because I feel like that feedback and knowing that who I so that's like authentically who I want to be, right? And I think I have the unique perspective of knowing people from all walks of life and being like, yeah, they're human. Like I can just give them space as a human and we all come from different influences. And to the point that you mentioned earlier about not using title and stuff, it's because it separates us, right? So if I came in to any situation. And I was like, well, I'm Dr. Hostetler. Please, please. But oh no, hold the applause, right? Like hold the applause. It would make me incredibly uncomfortable, right, as a human. But also it loses people because I never want it to feel like, and I'm even talking teaching, doing therapy, doing trainings, any of this stuff it's always about being able to sit with someone and being like, "Hey, what can we all learn here? How can we all share? How can we build community?" And I think that starts in our home and teaching our kids that like this is your house and like you are a person who has needs and wants and this is how you manage these in a realistic way.
I appreciate you sharing that. I wanted to ask you about like how motherhood specifically or how becoming a mother has really pushed you to accomplish your goals both personally and professionally?
Yeah, goodness, motherhood challenges me all the time to just like, oh, I can't give up, right? I can't, I know I joke with you a fair amount about this, but like, I can't just sell everything and go buy that gas station in Oklahoma and just camp out. Like, I can't do that. But it has really challenged me to show up in ways that I can so I have to balance time all the time. So my weeks look like you have 50 things that need to be done. And you also need to be a mom in this, and you also need to be a partner in this, and maybe answer your phone once in a while when someone texts you, and, you know, look at this and do this. And so for me, motherhood has really propelled me into a direction of do challenging things because it matters to people who matter to you. So I don't think I would have ever left my state job out of the state hospital. I think I would still be camped out there and doing programming and really pouring my heart and soul into that mission and making a difference where I could or how I felt like uh, the passion to make that difference because I think I was really good at that position. I think that it fed a part of me that was I want to give back to the world and I want to help vulnerable populations and I want to invest my time and energy into really making a difference in spaces where people don't really get people to pay attention to them. They're a little bit more voiceless. They are often dehumanized, right? So I want to be in those spaces and I want to make sure that there's a buffer there, right? So I felt very very strongly about that position. But the reality of it is it took away from me as a mom. and it took away from my time. And it was me pouring my heart and my passion into other people's children, and that's not the deal that I made with my kids, right? So when I chose to be a mom and when I chose to bring them into the world, and I'm using that language very deliberately because I absolutely chose to be a mom and I had the resources to become a mom. And so, for that, I felt very obligated to show up for my son. And then when I actually left that position is when I had my daughter. And I was like, yeah, I can't there are two people in this world that deserve their mom to have space to pay attention to them, to have the ability to work a flexible schedule and to show up at soccer games. And on sick days, it's not the end of the world because I could be there. And so for me, they were the driving force behind me leaving a job that I really loved and dealing with the consequences of that. So I had some emotional, like I had some what I would say grief leaving, but also knowing it was for my obligations. My children did not ask to be here. They are here because I've decided to be a mom, and I think like showing up for them has really propelled my career in a direction that I couldn't have even imagined. I'm doing things that I absolutely love doing. I get to do therapy all week. I love doing that. I love the art of holding space for people and being able to just like be a real human with other humans and encourage that and just let them like no show up in your raw form, right? Like what do you look like with sweatpants and hair tied up? Like let's do I want to see you cry for 45 minutes. Like, let's do this. And then I also get to teach. And I feel like, had I not been a mom, I don't think I would have been pushed to go outside my comfort zone of working inside facilities. I don't think that I would have been pushed to prioritize myself in the way of like, I can do hard things. Like, I can start a business. How hard could it be? Like, and I feel like my kids were the driving force behind that in a lot of ways because I feel obligated to show up for them and to be like to have a little bit of emotional space for them too. Because when you're doing work all day long, right? And if you work in the human field, this is a big thing, but I even think in corporate world, how much energy, how much supply do you leave over for your kids? And I don't know. I think that changes day to day and depending on like, what went on, but asking yourself like, "Hey, can I do something a little bit differently that leaves more space for them?" And that space could look like having a conversation, making dinner, listening to music together, dancing around. It doesn't have to be this like intensive, heavy lifting of parenting, like teaching them life lessons all the time, but like how can you show up in a very like authentic way? And does that look like making career changes? Does that look like leaving relationships? Does that look like moving to a different neighborhood? And I think my kids really pushed me in the direction of like, ah, man, I'm going to have to do something else. Like, I'm going to have to be more present in this.
Yeah, and that is such a good point. And I could just like talk to you for hours just about that. But the only thing I will say is that the grief that we feel, especially if you're the type of woman who was very career focused, right? Really focusing on
Hmm.
career growth, and you kind of had this path in your mind. And whether you wanted kids or you didn't and then had them, that really doesn't matter. I just think well, it does in a different part. But I think that when you have a child then and you become a mother and you were very career driven and focused, you do get to a point where you say, like, I'm not going to be able to do both, right? And
Hmm.
some people choose one way or the other. But I think if more of us start saying, like, instead of I can't do both, like, how can I do both? And to just
Hmm.
be able to remember who you are, like, all the skills that got you through your life and like that helped you propel through a career, you still have those skills. They don't go away because you became a mom. Now you just have to use them differently. So if that means that now your work style is more flexible, maybe you start a business, maybe you work different hours, like there are more options. And so I appreciate you being just very authentic and open about that and just honest with the listeners. And final question before I let you go. What does self care look like for you?
So this is going to be the part of this where I feel like I could probably use the most growth because if you, uh, I mean, I guess we went through my bio already, and I talked about all the deep thoughts that I have about my parenting philosophy here, and about showing up for them and about prioritizing my kids. And so I think like that's probably pretty evident that I view them as a absolute priority in this because I feel an obligation to pour into them as their parent, but also like that that is my like that's my contribution to the world is like my career, but also like these little humans that I brought into this that are going to outlive me, and that is legacy work there. And so I feel very convicted in that, or very connected to that, I should say. So I did put some thought into how I self-care because I think I self-care in a little bit of a different way. Right. And so, because I was thinking about this, and I know we joked before we got on here. I'm like, oh, buddy, don't ask me that question. I'll stay it off. Right. But for me, I have thought about in the last year, how have I dedicated time to self-care? Because when I was working in the institution, I didn't have time, right? I went to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, dropped my son off at daycare on the way, went to work all day, got done at like 5:45, picked him up, hung out with him all night, did like the nighttime routine, did what I needed to do, and went to bed and started the day over. And so I didn't have time to prioritize anything. And it's not like before that in grad school, I wasn't working 24/7 too, right? So I have this little bit of a workaholic um, vibe to me. I do come from working class parents that are like, hey, a hard day work is like what you need to do. So I think that was instilled at me in a very young age, and I have actively tried to kill that out of me a little bit at a time. And I think it has to come in bite-sized pieces because think about the culture of that, right? Growing up with working class parents that are like, you work full time, you do what you need to do, don't take days off if you don't have to, be like a good employee. And then now having time to work for myself and realizing like, oh, I don't have like I just have to show up for myself. And what does that look like? And what does it look like actually taking some time to self-care? So, as I've thought about this more in the last year, I have actually rededicated myself to learning things again and having space to grow my knowledge. And that has been like such a breath of fresh air for me. I have read tons of books. I have been afforded the opportunity to learn things and just like sit and think about stuff, right? And problem solve, get my own life in order, pay attention to parts of myself that I had been neglecting, and pay attention to my rougher edges as a person. Like, why does this make me angry? Like, what is it about this? And just being able to like actually sit with it instead of pushing it off or dismissing it, and having time and having the ability to kind of really just let myself be vulnerable has been like so beneficial for me in the last year on a level of I got to feel the emotions that I needed to feel. I got to think the thoughts that I needed to think. And that for me, I feel like is a really deep level of self-care, right? Like it's like the therapy level of self-care, but it allowed me to be a human again and like get excited about stuff again. And I like that feels like I'm pouring just endlessly into myself when I actually give myself to just be a human. And like, you know what? I'm gonna grow this garden. I don't know anything about growing plants. Am I going to read anything about? No, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe watch a YouTube video or two. Like, but at like this. I think for me, it was like, oh, I'm gonna let myself be a human, and that felt like that feels like self care to me.
It absolutely is self care. I mean, self care is simply the practice of protecting your well being and happiness. And I challenge our listeners to really think about what self care looks like for them, right? So think about what does self care look like for me? How can I fit it into my life? And Give yourself space to be a human. So, thank you so much for being on with us, Kate, and thank you to our
Absolutely.
listeners. And I'll talk to y'all very soon.
Thanks, guys.